How much did instability on defense and other distractions impact Ryan Day? The play caller last year seems to have less on his plate this year.
Well, he did complain that he fashions himself as, yes, the head coach of the Ohio State Buckeyes, but thinks if this thing's really running well, I've got a guy over there running the defense, and my words, not his exactly, I don't have to worry about defense, and I can just concentrate on calling great offense, which I think the purists among us would say, excuse me, bro, you are the head coach of the entire team. Everything part and parcel of that comes back on you. And there's a lot of hindsight 2020 second guessing here. When they got stomped by Alabama, 52 points and 600 yards in that national championship game, why didn't he pull the plug on Kerry Combs after that, if Kerry Combs was the problem, or the direction Kerry Combs was taking the thing? Why didn't they pull the plug and make the changes that they needed to make at that time? And one of the arguments I had was, well, you did make the national championship game, as bad as the defense was, and you run the risk if you uproot in midstream and try to rebuild your defense, maybe you run the risk of not making the playoff or winning the Big Ten the following year, which he kept status quo, and they didn't win the Big Ten and they didn't make the playoffs. So I don't know. He is the head coach, and I think when he made those comments, I think he lost a little bit of sight of that, and almost was in some regard making a excuse for how it went sideways on him, and not taking ownership perhaps of the fact that he made the decision ultimately to go status quo. So now he's got a guy that he feels he can rely on in Jim Knowles, and everything so far has been hunky-dory with Jim Knowles, Tim Walton, Perry Eliano, Larry Johnson. Everything seems to be going pretty well, and so we'll see this fall if it all comes out of the wash and they win the games they're supposed to win and get to the playoff and win the Big Ten. That's when we'll know whether the proof's in the pudding or not.
Yeah, I mean, I sure you're going to have to put thought into what's wrong with his defense. I mean, he will have less on his plate this year, but you as a head coach, you better be able to multitask. I mean, hell, in our just everyday normal jobs, we all are being asked to multitask. So, you would sit there and think somebody making $7 million a year would be able to multitask. I certainly would hope that it wouldn't affect him in terms of being a play caller. I mean, there is something to be said about maximum bandwidth, and at some point, something's got to give. But I certainly wouldn't see it being his play calling duties or anything there. But as Steve said, and as Ryan has said, he has his defensive head coach in Jim Knowles, and it doesn't mean that he's going to be derelict on his duties as a head coach of checking in and being aware of the defense. But you've got somebody who's got all of the accountability over there. They've made some huge changes. So I don't know if I would sit there and say that play calling would be something that suffered, but something's got to give.
If you guys have a minute or two, we got a super chat coming in. We appreciate that, Darnell, as well. Why does Ohio State start linebackers that are slow and can't follow running backs out of the backfield?
Apparently they recruit linebackers that are slow and can't follow running backs out of the backfield because you have to play who you've got. You can't make trades. You can't trade in season. You can't sit there and do that. So you got who you got. So it's an evaluation situation, or maybe they just were targeting the wrong players, missing out. I mean, I don't know if I'm necessarily going to sit there and say that I'm 100% in agreement of saying that they're slow and can't follow running backs out of the backfield. I mean, everybody's going to want to sit there and pick on poor Tough Borland for a play that we're all going to remember for the rest of our lives against Alabama, where they, Steve Sarkisian schemed up Ohio State, schemed them into oblivion on that play. I mean, situations happen there. I mean, linebacker recruiting, getting guys like C.J. Hicks and Gabe Powers, and I still believe Powers may end up sliding down to line. You're only going to be able you can only play who you've got there. So they need to recruit better. And this, this isn't I'm not putting this at the feet necessarily of Al Washington, who was the linebacker coach up until the changes were made, but I don't know if they necessarily were going out and getting the guys that were necessarily the right fits. But good news, Darnell, they're only going to have 2 linebackers out there now most of the time, except for when they're going against 12 personnel, and we'll have to put a Sam out on the field.
Yeah, I agree with Kevin. I think a lot of it was a function of recruiting. I mean, Ryan Shazier, Raekwon McMillan haven't been walking through that door at Ohio State in recent years. And those are just 2 examples, not even a Jerome Baker, caliber type guy, who could do everything at linebacker. You're hoping they get back to that level of play here in the next year or 2. It says a lot when Steel Chambers is a running back at the beginning of preseason camp and they move him over to linebacker and he ends up being the best linebacker on the team. That kind of tells you everything you need to know about what a clown show. Urban Meyer talked about how the wide receiver group that he inherited from Luke Fickell, Urban Meyer, in the early 2010s was a clown show, and that they whipped them into shape eventually, and they became a great unit and won a national championship. Well, to me, the linebacker unit in some regards has been a clown show, so they got to get that figured out, obviously.